All right, welcome everyone. We'll make a start right on time. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Hunter Living Histories meeting for the 1st of November 2021. I want to acknowledge that I'm meeting on the Wabaka lands, Mullumbimba, Newcastle, and I'd like to pay my respects to Aboriginal elders, both past, present, and those yet to be. I also want to acknowledge the lands of the traditional owners that you're all beaming in from today via Zoom, and I also want to acknowledge any Indigenous or Aboriginal descendants or peoples that are joining us today. And welcome you all here. Thank you very much for making the time to join us. The year seems to be escaping very quickly, and there's been a lot going on. So, Anne, do we have any apologies for the meeting today?
Yes, we've got apologies from Cameron Archer, Howard Bridgman, Professor Marie Gleeson, Jane McManus, Ashley Duncan, and member for Wallsend, Sonia Hornery.
Okay. Does anyone have any other apologies as which to share with us? Just speak up because I can't see everyone all the time. So apologies if I haven't detected a hand or anything like that. Okay, so for those who were present at our last meeting, which was held, 2 weeks ago, I think, if you want to have a look at the minutes that came out and just let us know if there are any corrections that need to be there. And if you're happy with them, could I have a mover and a seconder, please?
I think I picked up one Unwell. I think it's
Unwell. Oh,
yes.
no, don't do that.
So yeah, we've got to put the M.
They're our shortlisted work integrated learning Hall of Fame large employers. So you better get them right.
Yeah.
Is Tim here?
He's going to be a little bit late.
Okay.
It's at 1 o'clock.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, any other issues with the last minutes?
No, just a slightly different model.
Sorry, is that you, Kerry?
Yeah, sorry, I forgot I wasn't muted.
Oh, okay.
I thought Teams does it automatically.
The perils of Zoom. Okay. All right, so can I have a mover and a seconder?
I'll move, John.
Thank you. Okay, who was that? Sorry, John's got his hand up and there was one other person that, who was that? Oh, thanks, Marla. Okay, Marla and John. Okay, on to the presentations, of which we have 3 today. So first is from Associate Professor Nancy Cushing on the Newcastle Time Bar. So over to you, Nancy.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me along. It's a real pleasure to be here. I love this group and everything that you do. So thanks for allowing me to share some of my work on the Time Bar with you. So I know a lot of people, when they give these presentations, it's really a sort of a work in progress and talking about the way that they're doing their research and the sources that they're using. But I'm going to take a slightly different approach of presenting you with not quite a finished product, but something that's pretty far along the way. So it is a short paper about Newcastle's Time Bar. So I think hopefully I have the capacity to share my screen. Looks like it. And so is that showing now in the right?
Yes, that's good, Nancy.
Yep. Good. Okay. Yeah. So I'll be talking about Newcastle's time bars, time telling in a colonial port city. And I want to start with this quote. The articulation of time is at the heart of power relations, from Nelson and Olin in Monuments and Memory. And doing some work on the time bar, that was really a position that I came to really respect and think has a lot of insight, because I think that is what time is all about, power. So in his work on regulating time in China, Wu Hang differentiates between timekeeping and time telling. So timekeeping was the highly technical and sometimes secret practice which took place behind the scenes. So in China, that was in the imperial household, And in the West, in places like Australia, it's in astronomical observatories. Time telling is different. It's a public act undertaken by the state to convey standardized official time to the populace, to bring order to a country, and to shape social space and identities. For several years now, I've been exploring the use of time balls in Newcastle and in Sydney, and I recently had a residency at the Sydney Observatory to look at their time ball. And the time ball is a form of time telling which relied on sophisticated technology, but operated in the simplest of forms, providing in most cases just one accurate time signal each day. So in these colonial ports, the flow of people and goods inwards and outwards necessitated the merging of time between land and water, between outpost and metropolis. And the time ball was a key means of achieving this integration. So my interests include the logistics of establishing and conducting the time balls, how they were intended to act as an exercise of power, and the roles they actually played for those at sea as well as those on shore. Timekeeping started gently in the place which became Newcastle, and during the tens of thousands of years of undisturbed occupation by Awabakal and Warramai peoples, time in Mulubinba, the place of the fern, at the mouth of the Coquelin River, was marked, as for other traditional societies, by celestial bodies, by day and night, high and low tides, the rise and fall of stars and planets, and the cycles through the many seasons. When the first European invaders arrived in 1797, they brought not only guns, germs, and an eye for the coal seams visible in the cliffs surrounding the river mouth, but also timepieces, which told them when they should eat, work, and sleep, and helped them move with such confidence around the world. The invaders established a settlement in 1801, officially naming it Newcastle 3 years later, to express their aspiration that it should become as great a center of coal mining and shipping as their homelands, Newcastle upon Tyne. From 1810, the workforce, put not only to mining coal, but to harvesting other primary resources, were those amongst the transported British convicts who reoffended in the colony and had colonial sentences imposed upon them. In this place of toil and deprivation, time mattered, and the practice of time telling began. A bell was sounded to ensure that convicts were at work by 5 a.m. in the summer and returned for 2 more 3-hour shifts through the day. Clock time was not yet absolute. They had starts that were later in the winter, and work stopped at sundown rather than at a particular time on the clock. These measured days accumulated into weeks and months and years, which delivered time-expired convicts back into civil society, or kept them trapped in Newcastle at the governor's pleasure. When the secondary penal function was moved north in the early 1820s, most of Newcastle subsided into a timelessness. It was described as almost deserted and like the straggling outlet of a decayed town. Coal mining was revived in the early 1830s when the Australian Agricultural Company acted on its monopoly on coal mining in the colony and restored some vivacity to the town. The company built the first tramway in Australia, on which full coal cars driven by gravity pulled empty ones back up to the pithead on wooden rails. It was a tram without a timetable, where there was coal to be exported and a vessel to take it away. That was when it ran. While most of those vessels were involved only in the local coastal trade, they linked Newcastle with a worldwide system of navigation. In the drive to make this navigation safer and more reliable, the British government launched a competition in 1714 to find a means of calculating longitude. The successful system developed by clockmaker John Harrison relied on very accurate timepieces, which were used to compare local time, as determined by astronomical observations, with the time at a location of a known longitude. In combination with a separate calculation of latitude, this indicated the global position. The time ball was a device conceived by Captain Robert Wauchope of the Royal Navy and first used in the naval dockyards at Portsmouth in 1829 to assist with this process. And this was the second time ball. I see I've written in 1803. Whoops, that should be 1833 that it was erected at the Royal Observatory at Greenwich. So the role of this time ball was to provide a visual signal once a day, usually at 1 p.m. in the British world and noon in the United States. A large ball was raised on a mast 5 minutes before the hour, held at the top for approximately 2 minutes, and then dropped precisely on the hour. By viewing the exact time signal on 2 or more days, maritime navigators were able to determine the rate of error in their timekeeping devices without taking them ashore to be checked by a clockmaker. By 1898, the British Admiralty list of time signals included 94 time balls around the globe. Together, they facilitated more reliable intercontinental voyages, supporting the capitalist development of trade and imperial expansion until the 1920s, when radio time signals largely replaced visual ones. The initial spread of time balls reflected British imperial interests, so they were established in the decade from 1833 at Mauritius, St. Helena, the Cape of Good Hope, Batavia, the Cape Coast Castle, Bombay, Madras, and Valparaiso, and in 1845 at Liverpool, and the following year in Washington, D.C. The first Australian time ball was put in place at Williamtown Breakwater in Port Phillip Bay in 1853 to provide the time to the large number of ships drawn by the gold rush boom. While the gold rushes to New South Wales were more limited in scale, longer established Sydney also sought to keep up with the latest navigational technologies. Establishing a time ball service was a key motivator for the establishment of the new observatory on Flagstaff, now Observatory Hill, in 1859. South Australia waited until 1875 to construct a time ball tower at Semaphore. Returning to Newcastle, a time ball for the city was advocated by the government astronomer, George Smalley, in 1865, but it was the 1869 wreck of the Douglas on Elizabeth Reef near Lord Howe Island, as it sailed with a cargo of coal from Newcastle to Yokohama, that made the case for a time ball more urgent. The loss of the Douglas was attributed to the ship being off course because of an inaccurate chronometer. Newcastle was frequently the first port of call for ships entering Australian waters from the north or east because of its role as a coaling depot, and also often the last port cleared before a long ocean-going voyage. The inquiry into the loss of the Douglas recommended, and I quote, "The increasing importance of the port of Newcastle, the number of fine ships constantly arriving at it and departing to all ports of the world, freighted with valuable cargoes, clearly shows the necessity there is of some reliable data by which they may be enabled to correct their timekeepers and start confidently on a voyage." Newcastle's first time ball was set up at the junction of Watt and Hunter streets, adjoining the post office and telegraph office. Initially made of wicker covered with black painted canvas and later with the larger internal skeleton of iron hoops, it was raised to the top of the mast at 12:55 p.m. and dropped at 1 under the supervision of the telegraph office, the time being provided by telegraph from Sydney Observatory. The integration of time balls with the telegraph, which was in place in Britain by the mid-1850s, led to a significant increase in their use, as it enabled them to be established at strategic coastal locations which did not have their own observatory or other source of highly accurate time. Knowing the time ball was centrally regulated increased confidence in its accuracy over manually operated time balls. The time ball on the site of Fort Mulgrave in Hobart, for example, was reported to be dropped by hand and not to be implicitly relied upon. But there were ongoing problems for the reliability of Newcastle's time ball related to the long distance transmission of the time signal. And I would just like to stop here and thank Anne for providing me with this photograph, because it's one, of many panoramas of Newcastle that you see. And if you're not looking for the time ball right in the center of it, you would probably never have noticed it. And just in case you still haven't really noticed it, here is the zoom in on the time ball from that photograph. And the sort of work site you can see in the foreground is the site of the customs house that was being constructed. So as it liked to be, Newcastle was ahead of other ports, some other ports in having a time ball, it was not provided in ports including Brisbane, Ceylon, Cairo, Port Said, Alexandria and Gibraltar until the turn of the century. So Newcastle, yay, got out in front on the time ball. For people in a regional port like Newcastle, the impetus was always to proclaim that they were the same or at least competitive with other larger centres. When it came to time with a time ball, they could be confident that they were not behind the times, at least in the public telling of it. Newcastle's second time ball was integrated into the design of its customs house, which first opened for business in November of 1877. The building was designed by colonial architect James Barnett with a 32-metre, 125-foot tower, which supported an octagonal lantern surmounted by a wind vane and the time ball on an iron mast. It was added between March and April of 1877. The site was land earlier reclaimed from the swampy margin of the river mouth and was very close to sea level, making the time ball 58 feet above the water, which was the lowest in Australia, with most of them being situated on hills. Newcastle time ball was made in Sydney to the standard specification of a 5-foot diameter. It was designed by Barnett and made of Muntz metal, an alloy of 3 parts copper and 2 parts zinc. The time ball was described as both ingenious and beautiful, with a piston at the bottom working in an air cylinder and compound gearing to raise the ball. And very similar works are still in place at the Sydney Observatory and in use all the time. And I was fortunate to be able to witness that. It's a really fascinating mechanical process to watch the ball being raised and lowered. When lifted, the ball was supported by cast iron steel shafts attached to levers, which were held in place by an electromagnet. The magnet was controlled by a wire which ran to an office below, from which the ball could be dropped manually or by a telegraphic signal. The time ball began service in February of 1878 under the supervision of Captain Wetherell, Secretary to the Marine Board. In the New South Wales State Archives, I discovered a long correspondence between Wetherell and astronomer H.C. Russell about who should take over this duty on his retirement 20 years later, and what recognition of this service he should have. The letter on the right is from Russell, and it sets out exactly what the role of managing the time ball was for his successor. There is some evidence that the time ball was used for its intended purpose. People with interests in shipping could be seen gathered near the customs house, watches at the ready, waiting for the time ball to descend. When the captain and officers of the Japanese naval ship Suba made an official visit to Newcastle's Marine Board in 1886, the viewing of the clock and time ball were a natural accompaniment to champagne and refreshments. Wetherell reported in July 1896 that 98 deep sea-going vessels were in port, and all of them relied on the time ball to regulate their chronometers. Any break in the service of the time ball was seen as having the potential to cause a loss of life, ships, and profits. When any error of timing was made in the dropping of the ball, a notice appeared in the newspapers the following day. On at least one occasion, the ball was raised again and dropped an hour later, likely creating even more confusion. The time ball also had a role for those on shore. The time ball was operated according to land-based conventions, including not being deployed on Sundays and public holidays. For some, it divided the working day into halves and signaled the time for the midday meal. One woman recalled that as a child in the 1870s, she'd been told by her mother to watch from an attic window for the time ball to rise at 5 to 1, as a sign that her father would soon be home for dinner. Also a handy way to amuse a child who might otherwise be underfoot. The time ball had some capacity to reach into the intimate spaces of domestic life, integrating them with the wider world. This reach was limited, though, by the silence of the time ball. They were intentionally designed as visual time tellers because of the attention to accuracy. In comparison, a sound or oral time signal was more likely to create errors because of how sound waves travel through the air. The speed of sounds in dry air at 20 degrees Celsius is 343 meters per second. Changes in temperature and humidity lead to variations. But not having an oral accompaniment made the time ball more exclusive, of use only to those who had a direct line of sight to it and who had the time to stand around waiting for it to fall. In comparison with vision, sound is more democratic, spreading itself promiscuously over long distances, serving those who were out of line of sight in the back lanes in the dark places of a city. For those who wish to forget time or live outside its disciplines, sound was also more insidious and harder to exclude than the silent time ball. Further, Newcastle, like other coal ports, was marked by dust from coal in transit and smoke from ships' engines, the railways, and harbourside manufacturing. The poor visibility created hazards to navigation, including obscuring the light from nobbies. In still conditions, the time ball could be covered by smoke, negating its time-telling role. And I was really pleased to be able to find this image that was reproduced in a report done in 2000 on the time ball. The remedy applied was to fire a gun from Signal or Allen's Hill from 1871. The human dimension returned, with a gunner placing a charge of 1 pound of black powder in a muzzle-loaded gun and pulling a lanyard to fire the gun when he saw the time ball released. When Fort Scratchley was built on the site in the early 1880s, its soldiers took on time gun duties. The time gun was the only one of its armaments directed back towards the city rather than out to sea. Like the time ball, the time gun came to be such a fixture in Newcastle that any variation, such as mistaken firing at an early hour one day in June 1898, could lead to confusion in the city, where the sounding of guns could also signal a ship in distress or that people needed to turn out to fight a fire. Firing a gun was an effective time-telling technique. It created the loudest sound which could be reliably generated in 19th century Australia, voicing the power of the empire and the state as guardian and protector as it imposed order, regularity, and restraint, cutting through the general hum of the busy port city and the ship, mine, and factory bells and whistles, communicating their own time disciplines to the workers. The function of the gun in assisting with the regulation of shipboard chronometers made clear the connection between the maintenance of that power and reliable commerce on the high seas, symbolizing the protection of the Pax Britannica over the multifarious cargoes entering and exiting Australian ports. For citizens of foreign powers visiting Newcastle, hearing a gun discharge each day was a reminder of the readiness of the military to defend the port, what Diane Collins termed an exercise in acoustic theatre. The time ball was at once a highly sophisticated mechanism then, supported by state-of-the-art technologies, and a very simple one. While primarily intended for skilled navigators, it required no special knowledge to read it, the way children have to be taught to read a clock. In this, it paralleled the Chinese drum and bell towers, which did not contain sophisticated timekeeping mechanisms, but only enormous bells and large number of drums used to signal significant hours, like the opening and shutting of the city gates. Between items in this schedule, there was no lasting record of the time. In the same way, the time ball erased the visual evidence of the time it provided. After being raised just before 1 p.m., it fell to its resting place further down the spire, leaving the viewer with no lasting cues as to whether it had been dropped that day or was yet to be dropped. In Newcastle, the ship's captain complained in 1871 that he was anxious to ascertain the correct time, but had not seen the ball drop in the previous 2 weeks, so he didn't even know if it was in operation. The time ball was not sufficient to structure Novocastrians' days, as the presence of the 7-foot wide clock faces that you can see in this photograph, lit at night by gas, just beneath the time ball, make clear they needed something more to actually be able to regulate their days. What the time ball did was to ensure that 1 p.m. was accorded a particular exactitude in a continuous river of time. The operation of both the time ball and the time gun had ceased by the mid-20th century. There's some bit of uncertainty, but I think 1941 is the generally accepted end date. Although made obsolete by radio time signals and better clocks and watches, and having less impact in the noisier and more polluted center of steelmaking, there was some regret at the passing of what were familiar elements of the day, used by many to set their clocks, as well as those with a special need for the exact time, including watchmakers and shipmasters. After a long period of inactivity, the time ball was fully restored in the late 1980s, and I understand that Bob Donnelly is the person to speak to about that. My interests are a bit earlier. So I'm interested in the cultural history of the time ball, a deeper reading of its function and significance. And so what I've come to understand is that time balls connected their host ports to colonial networks, serving as links in a system of managing time and space, both at sea and on land. As part of this increasingly global system, Australia could transcend its geographical position, so awkwardly distant from places from which its citizens originated and where they still had ties of culture and commerce. Newcastle might be 17,000 kilometers away from Greenwich, but its people could feel confident of their place in the world, both literally in the case of seafarers and figuratively for residents, as they regulated their days by the sight and sound of official imperial time. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nancy. We got any questions or observations?
Johnny, it's Ron Barber.
Yep.
Nancy, the Fort Scratch Historical Society from, I think, probably 2014. We got the £2 cannon. We had it made and started use. It came in for Australia Day on in 2013. I think it was about 12 months later that it started being used every day except Tuesdays, in sync with the time ball, and that's still going on. At various stages through that time, the society has actually paid for the maintenance of the time ball. At present, I think we're doing that again because the harbour master, or the lady who was in charge of the harbour, was seeking money from the state government to have that maintained on a regular basis, because the owners of the Customs House nowadays are happy for it to be looked after, but they're not prepared to expend any money on it themselves.
I did see that there was, I think, quite a large grant received for the time ball recently, I think in the past 12 months.
That may be it.
Yeah, so I wasn't clear. Thanks for clarifying that, because I wasn't sure whether the people that, you know, run the Customs House now are actually the ones who are leading that, but you think it's
Fort Scratch has been the leader.
Yeah, okay, interesting, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Just yell out or raise your hand. Bob?
Yeah, I just getting forward to meeting Nancy in the near future and passing on a lot of the information that I have. Regarding the time ball, I first kicked off in looking at it in 1988. That was when we had the bicentenary celebrations, and the Master Mariners of Australia company through the Newcastle section were the ones who sponsored the time ball to get refurbished and automated and up and running. So I have a quite fair bit of information on that
Well,
I
that'd
can
be great.
pass on to Nancy.
Wonderful. Yeah, I looked at the plans that I think were drawn up at that time that are held in the local studies library now. And yeah, there's a lot of really useful information there. So I'd like to hear more as well. Did Mark Rigby want to say something?
Yes, Nancy. I came across an article about the governor's visit to Newcastle in 1847, and it said he had a meeting at 10 o'clock Newcastle mean time, which was 15 minutes in advance of Sydney time.
Yeah.
And then in 1895, the clocks were put back because Newcastle and Sydney time, they standardised the times in the colony, and we were roughly 5 minutes ahead of the 10 hours ahead in Greenwich Mean Time.
Yeah, look, and I find that fascinating. And of course, I alluded a couple of times to Newcastle and the way there's always the niggle and wanting to be its own place and have some autonomy, but also be connected with the wider world. And I think time is a really interesting example of that, where most places had their own local time. And the general explanation is that once the railway system started to go out from a fixed point, mainly from Sydney in New South Wales, you couldn't have a train that left according to Sydney time and arrived according to Parramatta time or Bathurst time, because you'd start to have collisions or people would miss their trains. So that you had to standardize time. But in the case of Newcastle, that standardization occurs with the telegraph rather than with the trains arriving, because of course the trains don't arrive from Sydney until 1889. So it's quite a bit later than the first time ball being erected in the late 1860s. But yeah, it is a really fascinating thing how arbitrary time actually is and how many times it has been realigned for a place like Newcastle.
Very interesting. We've got a question from the chat, Nancy, from Sarah Zenos. She apologises, her mic isn't working, but she was interested in how the time ball actually works. Is it similar technology to GPS or using gravity or latitude?
So how it goes up and down? Is that
yes.
the aspect? Yes. Well, again, Bob might know more about the Newcastle one, but the one that I've witnessed is the Sydney one. And so that one is technology from the 1850s. And so every day, someone who works at the observatory climbs up a whole lot of stairs that are more like ladders and goes up into the time ball tower, and then just has an iPhone with the time on it. And it used to be that you wound it up with something sort of maybe resembling a ship's wheel, but with cogs. And so you're lifting the big ball up the spire. And now there's a motor that does that, but it's very loud. It's quack, 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 quack. And then it is held there. It's pinned in place. And then you press one release. And it is in the Sydney case, you're making an electrical connection. So you just press that down and make the connection, and it just plunges through gravity. But then it is hydraulic to some extent, so it doesn't sort of smack, it kind of bounces. If you ever watch the one in Sydney, you can see it goes boing, boing a few times when it lands. And I was talking about how it was silent, and that's a little bit of an exaggeration. Certainly when you're up in that tower, it's quite deafening inside, but it's not something that would travel very far, that sound.
Nancy, that's Ron Barber again. Johnny has a photo of the sand hills and the cottages and so on that were built under the fort, yeah. And the fort's in that photo, and on the wall to the east of the main gate is the original time gun at the fort, the brass cannon. It's a bit hard to make out, but it is there in that particular photo. It's one that's in your collection, John.
Okay.
And if I can send through you, Johnny, some photos of the current time gun in sync with the time ball that Nancy might be interested in.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Also, while you were speaking there, Ron, I remembered years ago, someone pointed out a time ball in a backyard of one of the images when they blew it up. So it was, again, it was one of these things which no one would have been looking for unless someone knew what they were looking for. But you're not collecting pictures of time balls, are you, Nancy? I mean, I'm
Oh,
sure
well, I didn't know that backyard.
this is a real. This is a
They're
real.
usually quite official.
Yeah, well, someone just pointed out it was, it was pretty incredible because it wasn't doing anything. It was just sitting there in the backyard of one of these shots in Newcastle. So it might have been undergoing some kind of preparation for installation or something. It was one of those type of images. But I remember, okay,
Yeah, and I mean, one
made a
assumes
mental
that
picture and then
something
forgot
happened
about
to
it.
those original time balls when the Customs House one went in place. So perhaps
Yeah.
they were just in someone's
I'll
backyard
see
for a
if I
while.
can track it down or remember where it was. But yeah, did you have anything to add on that operation, Bob? Or
Yeah, I can talk about it for ages, but
no? We'll make it brief.
but simply, it did raise up and down, and the key to the mechanism of raising up and down was a rack and pinion arrangement, and hence, as with rack and pinions, you use a pawl, what they call a pawl, which actually will hold it in place. It's the release of that pawl which then allows the whole thing to drop down. But the interesting thing about it was the cylinder in which it dropped down into in the older days was filled with soapy water. And that was part of the operations in the old days. The water had to be continually topped up and soap added and etc. Whereas compared to these days, we use special hydraulic fluids, But yeah, it was, and that's the other reason why there hasn't been a great deal known about it, because simply in a tower like that, access to get up to, even to change, to work on the clock mechanism or to work on the time ball mechanism, does not meet Australian standards these days. Just a few little points.
Nancy, there's a few comments in the chat that you might want to make note of about articles.
I can see Ken's, and that's a very quick one. And
Cheryl Ann has got a reference to a Stockton Historical Society article. All right. Any other?
And it's the instant that the ball starts to fall. That
Okay.
is exactly 1 o'clock.
Great.
And John Fryer has his hand up.
Okay, sorry. Thanks, Anne. Thank you. John.
Johnny, people might be interested, and I might have my facts slightly wrong here, but I think it was a meeting, the first meeting that all the Surveyor Generals of Australia got together. I believe it was 1892. They got together and they set the standards of time right across Australia, so that Adelaide was half an hour different to Sydney and Perth was 2 hours different and so on. Because up till then, there was no standard across Australia, as I understand it. The only reason I know that is that in 1992, I went to the 100th anniversary dinner of those Board of Surveyors of Australia. And that fact was mentioned then, and it always stuck in my mind. And I haven't researched it. I don't know if it's true, but that's what they said. I was at the 100th anniversary dinner, and that was in 1992.
There you go.
Gianni, apparently the date that came in was the 1st of February, 1895.
Okay. Thank you. All right, Nancy. Plenty of stuff there.
Thank you so much.
Okay. If there are any other questions, just put them in the chat and Nancy can deal with them. All right, we'll move on to our next presenter, which is Jennifer Scholander. She's a research liaison librarian, and she's presented a few meetings ago. She's here to speak with us on how to use Nova Open Access Repository. Over to you, Jenny.
Thanks, Johnny. And hello, everybody. Thank you for having me here again today. So yes, I'm going to be talking about probably the easier ways of trying to find open access things in Nova. So I'll just share my screen. So we had Open Access Week last week. So I'm going to point you to a couple of things that might be of interest around that. Before I start with Nova, though, I'd just like to let you know how Nova fits into the general sort of open access idea of getting to information. So you've got what we call different colours of open access, and Nova fits into this green sort of category of open access. It means that it's something that's been put into usually a university repository or any other repository that's made open access and freely available. So you can see here for us, any of the full text accepted versions of research are put into an institution repository, and our repository is Nova. So I just wanted to show you that. And if this can come up. So as I said, Nova is our own open access repository. So open access means that if it's fully open access, it'll be free for you to access. And all universities would have some kind of open access repository with the same sort of things that I'm going to show you today. They'll each have a slightly different way of searching it. But also you might be interested to know that we've got some open access journals as well that you can access through the library. So if we go to Nova, so the easiest way to get to Nova is just from the library homepage. I've got things displayed on a bigger screen over here. That's why I'm not quite looking straight on at you. So if you just click on the Nova link here, and you'll be brought to this page. Now, there's a couple of tricks to searching for things in Nova. I would suggest perhaps not using this search box here. What I'm going to show you is using this drop down here today, because in that way you can actually go in and search in particular different ways for whatever it is you're looking at. Another thing that you can look at, if you know that somebody's put an article or a thesis in recently, you can click on the latest editions. You can certainly sit and look at the entire repository if you've got time to look at 38,000 things. But if you look in the latest editions, and because horrifyingly it's the 1st of November today, there's not much that's been added today or this month. But, you know, if you'd got halfway through a month, you could have a look and see, well, what's been added to the repository this month. So that's just in that browse section, latest editions. The other thing that's in here are what's called communities and collections. And there's two different things in here at the moment. Nova has a couple of local collections that they've put together, and that means that they're particular journals or bulletins. And to search, if you know that something's in one of these or you're particularly interested in something, so if we click on this one, and then you do your search in here, and I think fathers and daughters is something that the Family Action Centre has done things on. So you can then see that any of the things that are held in the Fatherhood Research Bulletin within that particular community of Nova will come up, and you can read it that way. So that's just in that communities and collections. And the latest thing that's being added to a lot of publications now are the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And what that is, there's a set of 13, 14 goals, 15, 16, 20 goals, I think there is, that the UN has looked at and said, we want to make sure that these are implemented to create a better life for all of us. And so you can actually be searching in one of these. So let's go to climate change. And you could put in some keywords just in this search box to see if there's been any Newcastle researchers that have written an article that is addressing that particular UN Sustainable Development Goal. There may not be a lot in there at the moment, but over time that's going to increase because that's something that researchers are having to identify in their work. Okay, so that was in that communities and collections. Now, another way you can search is by title. So if you know what the title is going to start with, you can simply click into here. Otherwise, if you know the title of an article or someone's thesis, just type it into here. So I've got one here that I prepared earlier. Ban. And it comes up and you can click on that. And if there's any PDF attached to it or some sort of downloadable file, it'll be down the bottom of the page. You've got some brief information here, a bit of an abstract. If you click on that, it will also open up that particular document. All right, so that was if you searched for the title of something. If you're looking for things that have been written by a particular author, and again, these are all Newcastle resources, University of Newcastle researchers. So if you know the author's name, you can see I've put one in there before. So I want to see how much this person's written and put into our Nova repository. You can click on that. You can see all of the things that they've created. There's an article, chapter out of a book, conference paper, and another journal article. And you'd be able to get access to those as well, as long as there's this link to the PDF at the bottom. So if we go back. So that was if you knew who the author was, creator, author. If there was a subject that you were wanting to see, well, how much has been written by any of our researchers at Newcastle? Again, you would just click on the subject and we'll just put in something very broad here, Fort Scratchley. So you'll get all sorts of things coming up. Now it's picked up Fort here, so that's why you're getting some of these other interesting looking things happening. If we put double quotation marks around that to see if it holds it together, I don't think, no, see, it doesn't like the double quotation marks. It just takes you back to the search. So just put in whatever it is that you're looking for. And then again, you'll be able to access any of those things. Now, what I forgot to mention was that if you wanted to save any of this information and email it to yourself, you simply click on the little cross down the bottom and it adds it to this quick collection here. So I might go back and I'll do that author search again, just to show you how things can be added to that quick collection and then what happens with them afterwards. So I've added 2 things to my quick collection. If you wanted to look for things by particular resource type, and this is good if you're trying to find a thesis by someone, you can click on thesis here and this comes up with the thesis link here. Now, I think this is where we go up here. I'll just put in this and see. Yeah, so I've searched within the thesis and I've come up with the thesis for this particular person. I put in another name. And there's Rachel's thesis there. So it's a bit harder to narrow a thesis by a particular title down here because you're not getting that same search. You'd be searching across the theses and the working papers if you were to start to search here. But the other thing you can do is you go into thesis, and if you knew the name of the author, you could certainly search that way as well. So that's searching that. And then for the quick collection, I added a few things to my quick collection. So if I click on that now, and where it's got this little double quotation mark, if I click on that, I can then email that to myself, and any of the information will come to me in an email. Now, get rid of that. This stays here as long as you have this window open. Once you shut that down and turn the computer off, that'll disappear. It doesn't save it into a collection forever and ever. So just be aware that's just to save things quickly so that you can then send them to yourself so that you've got it. So if we go back to the starting point. So that's the easiest way to use Nova. There are a couple of other things that you could do. There is an advanced search. So you can be searching by a keyword or creator here. It doesn't always bring back the result that you want. That's why I say using these particular areas works well. Another way to find a thesis is on this side, and you go to thesis. And she says with great confidence that this will work. And it does. So that's another way, if you want to get to a thesis straight away, is you use it on this side and do your search in the box. Now, this sign in here is only for the administrators that are working in the background of Nova. So don't think that it's like a database or a site that you can sign into. That is simply there for people who are adding things to Nova. So another thing I wanted to tell you about is that was a sort of very whirlwind tour of Nova. What we also have in the library classes, and I'll put this link in the chat and Anne can send it to everybody. We also had a session a couple of weeks ago where somebody did a half-hour presentation on Nova. So this link that I've just sent you, it's the recording of that, but you'll find that also in the library classes and this last webinar, and all of the recordings of any of the sessions that we've done are here. So there's that introducing Nova. So that's one place that you can go. Also, if you wanted to find a little bit more out about the open access things that you'd be able to look at, is if you go to the open access guide, we've got lots of information about open access, but then we've also got a guide here as well, which will step you through what it means for something to be open access, but also it will give you access to anything that is truly open access that you can get for free. So that will take you to all kinds of different repositories, journals that are free for you to access as well. And that's going to be helping with any of your research as well. So I'll stop sharing. So that was it. As I said, it was a whirlwind tour of Nova. Are there any questions? Can anyone access the uni catalogue? Yes.
The library catalogue, okay.
Yes, the library catalogue. And you can get access to some open access things using the library catalogue. Actually, but you know, get rid of that. Hang on, I'll just close that. Sorry, I'm just getting my screen up again. So if we were to do a search in the library catalogue, This is what one of the views will look like. It'll look slightly different once you're in the catalogue itself. You've got this tab over here that says open access. Now, if you think back to the slide that I had up before, this slide, there's different levels of open access. So anything that is truly open access in a repository that is a freely available online publication. We go back here. This tab here, where it says open access, will take you to things. Now, if it's a journal article, it may or may not be open access, but we can see from this little open access, I'll make this a bit bigger for you all. So you can see this symbol that says open access, and it's a little unlocked padlock. That means that it should be free for you to be able to access. Okay, so those sorts of things are also available by using that open access tab. But just be aware, open access doesn't always mean it's fully open. So it may be a little bit disappointing when you get somewhere and you're still not able to access it. We might be able to access it if you're a current staff or student of the university. But a lot of the other things, if they've got this, it should be open access to you. Does that answer that question?
Yes, thanks.
Any other questions for Jenny? Again, just speak up or raise your hands.
Just, I guess, just a comment, Jenny. Thanks for pointing out the browse. I think your first instinct is often to go straight to the search bar. And I know there's been, over the years, a lot of members of this group and students, and now that students' theses go straight online and are accessible unless they're embargoed, it's a great resource that, I think it's great to promote and be able to sort of access like journal articles, thesis, any publications of university postgrads and academics.
Yes. Any of our research that's there and you know is freely available will be searchable. But you know, I showed you that way of doing it because it is an easier way of navigating through Nova. But you know, if you have any questions, we've got a chat service that if you identify yourself as a community member and just say, look, I'm trying to find something in Nova, can you help me? Otherwise, staff or students can also chat to us. But yeah, I would recommend if you are using our chat to make sure you identify yourself as one of the community members, and you know you're part of Hunter Living Histories, and that will help whoever's answering the chat to know exactly the best way to help you with your question. But yes, Anne, it's a wonderful resource, and the more that people become familiar with it, the greater that kind of resource is going to be for everyone.
Well, thank you very much, Jenny.
That's okay. Have a
All right,
lovely
so
day,
any
everyone.
other questions? Whack them in the chat.
Yep, and I sent the link to that that YouTube, so that Anne will send that out if you want to have a look at that as well. All right. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. So, okay, third presentation is Tim, but I'm not sure if Tim's online. And should we just...
No, I've just checked. He said it'd be around 2 o'clock. So
okay.
I've got a minute to get here.
Okay.
He's
all right. Well,
I'll keep an eye out. I'll let you know. Yeah.
Okay. Well, do you want to jump into updates, or Kerry, would you like to give us an update from the City of Newcastle?
Hello, everybody. Oh, yes. Let me see what's going on. Oh, we're back open again to the public, doubly vax public, for 1 hour's work in the library. So that's the express model, and that will roll over and the 1st of December when the public health order changes. We're not doing any events or anything in the libraries until next year when we can get approval to hold events. So hopefully some of the first ones to come off the rack will be my bee exhibitions from the Magic Box down at the Digital Library. However, for Remembrance Day, I've had approval for an augmented reality experience to go at the Wickham Honour Roll at the Newcastle Interchange. So if you download the City of Newcastle app, you'll be able to trigger that augmented reality at the interchange. And it will tell you a little bit of the story about the honour roll and some of the names that are on it. And then it'll link to the database that we have on those names. So I'm looking forward to kicking that off. And that's about it, really, just getting used to coming back into work every day and having to put clothes on.
Yes, we're all getting used to that.
It's so tiring. I didn't realize.
Yeah. All right. Any questions for Kerry about City of Newcastle services or library or anything like that? Okay. Well, look, while we're waiting, well, thank you very much, Kerry. And thank you, Nancy. Who's?
Yeah, it's Robert.
How you going, Robert?
Good.
Fire away. Sorry, I can't see everyone, so
that's okay.
I think I can hear them better than I can see them.
Kerry, are you still on?
Yep, I'm here.
I remember years ago, there's a guy up in Brisbane who prepared a book which was a collection of the names and addresses of all of the photographers and studios in Australia. And I thought, what a brilliant resource. And I couldn't find a copy anywhere. So I actually rang him in Brisbane, and he said that his computer had been washed away in the Lockyer Valley floods, and he had no computer and no data left at all. So the only copies around are ones that people bought. And the library in Town Local Studies has a copy. So I was just going to ask whether you might be able to put that on as a scan task, not with any urgency, but just somewhere down the list, because it often comes up in Lost Newcastle. People say, I've got this photograph, don't know who it is, but I know the photographer. Where were they?
Okay, if you could just email me the details, and if you have the contact person, the contact of the author, that would be good, because then I got to get him to sign off on the copyright to have it put online. That would be brilliant. The idea of the Wickham Face to a Name database was we actually called for members of the public to donate a photograph of their family member if they had one. And we did have a few come in. So what I'm hoping is that with the augmented reality, which will get a little bit of a media plug, it might remind people, and maybe we'll get a few more faces. I did get some photographs of headstones of a lot of the men on the honour roll when I went to France a couple of years ago. So I've at least got those. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So good. We should do some updates then while we wait for Tim. Anne, did you want to start or?
Yeah, sure thing. I'll just give a brief update. Thanks to everyone that gave feedback around the format when we talked about just reviewing the Living Histories Meeting format. So we're concentrated on getting feedback from community members. Going to hold off maybe a month or early next year to get some feedback from academics and students, mainly because there's been a lot of changes across the university, new colleges and schools and new staff. And I know that we have a lot of academics receive the minutes and they say they appreciate the minutes, but I'm just going to put a few different questions to academics to get feedback. But yeah, generally good, honest feedback, and that's what we want. So yeah, I've made a summary that we'll be able to review in view of like looking at the agenda for next year. But yeah, just some good comments that came back around, you know, being able to share like common interests, enjoyed like a variety of locations, being able to have a few site visits when it's safe to do so, the ability to be able to exchange ideas. I think during Zoom we have had a few technology issues, and sometimes people feel as if they can't ask questions or engage as easily as being in a physical meeting. And there's a lot of comments came back about the type of presentations and the length of presentations as well. That often just getting that right can sometimes be difficult when, you know, we have a few presentations that people want to give. And just some useful things about the meeting were being able to make contact with other people, about the interdisciplinary and allied research and how people can collaborate from various disciplines, just learning about the local areas and also about Indigenous history. So I know there was a few people specifically mentioned what they'd like to see more in presentations is about our Indigenous culture and history, archaeology and research and communication around technology, so GIS, apps, LiDAR, photogrammetry, 3D modelling, very technical things that I think would sort of suit probably some of our surveying students, even engineering students around 3D modelling. And there was that mix when it comes to asking a question around physical versus Zoom meetings. I think the consensus was that they're both good formats, but yeah, they've got their positives and negatives, and maybe a general mix, a mix of each sort of next year. That I know someone like Don Seton-Wilkinson would be travelling 6 hours on a train to get to one meeting. So I can see it certainly does suit. And will probably suit some academics if they've got fairly tight teaching schedules. And there wasn't too much changes in terms of like the day or time of the meeting. So look, if anyone wants to give any other feedback, they're very welcome to do so. The other item that it was just from Dr. Brian Walsh, and I think I sent with the agenda last week, was his book launch up at Woodville School of Arts, and his book's called Woodville Uncovered, and the attachment's got all the details about that event. And also congratulations to Jeffrey Freeman. I don't think Jeffrey's in the Zoom meeting today, but he's been shortlisted for the Wheel Employability Award for 2022, along with Unwell for being a strong industry partner with the University of Newcastle. So I think there will be announced later in November. And can I also just give a bit of a plug for some of my colleagues in special collections? And I know Jenny mentioned Open Access Week that was last week, and my colleagues Kua Swan and Paige Wright were part of a short seminar, and it's online. It relates to a community-led approach around decolonising digital collections. Paige, I know you're at the meeting, so feel free to sort of say anything about that, but I'll share that in a minute. Just so it's like an introduction to that project, and it'll be really it's a really important project that I think for our Indigenous community members to sort of introduce it to the community. So thanks Paige and Kua for that. And we won't have volunteers returning until next year, seeing that we're so close to the end of the year and we're in the middle of a refurbishment in special collections. So yeah, we're just looking forward to just working on just structuring some of our projects and introducing gradually some of our regular volunteers back. And so look, that's about it for me, I think, Johnny. And I
Well, that's good, because you segued into Umwelt's shortlisting, and thank you very much, Tim. You're in. So Tim Adams is an archaeologist with Umwelt Australia, as Anne said. They're on the shortlist for the Hall of Fame, the Work Integrated Learning Hall of Fame. So thank you very much for your company's assistance with our group over the years, but also in support of our students as well. So Tim, would you like to?
I have just noticed that I'm down as Eliza, so that's a throwback.
That's okay. We're all cool here with that. We're very supportive.
So Eliza's not here today. She is at school, so thankfully, which is good for her. Yeah, I think Anne a couple of meetings ago may have mentioned there was some of the Perkins Street Boat Harbour wall exposed, with council just been extending the car park there on Wharf Road. So I just thought I threw together a little presentation yesterday, and I apologise if it's a little disjointed, but it was done during preparations for trick-or-treating, so there was a fair bit of blood and excitement as well at the same time. But before I launch into that, I will just, and again, Anne mentioned about interest in archaeology and the Aboriginal side of things, and I think last meeting I mentioned we were going to be Umwelt, we're going to be doing some with the Aboriginal community, some test pitting at the railway lane in Wickham, just immediately adjacent to the rail corridor. So we did 2 weeks worth of test pitting to see what the actual integrity of the archaeological resource was. And it was quite disturbed across the site, and there's very deep fill there, which quite ugly, horrible fill. But parts of it, certainly parts of a legitimate sand dune were exposed on, it looked like it was right on the edge of a swampy area. And so, I mean, within that, there was definite evidence like of alluvial action and quite high groundwater. There were certainly artifacts, Aboriginal artifacts there, which were a mixture of, I guess, water rolled and water like Bourne artifacts that had all been very much tipped around and things, but also some, not necessarily whether they're in situ or not because of the disturbed nature, but certainly ones for the local area. And Joni, it's the, I guess the high water level was possibly quite interesting, and you may know more about, I think there's an article relating to the Wickham corroboree ground, which was talking about worshipping of groundwater and things like that. So it's quite interesting that there is this quite extensive water action within this area we were testing, and including, you know, the very high groundwater and swampy area. So I'm not too sure if someone mentioned an old article that mentions possibly worshipping water.
Yeah, there's a whole post on the Hunter Living Histories on it, Tim, but it'd be very interesting. I mean, from the descriptions, it's a pretty immense place. It occupies a huge area of Wickham, so I don't know exactly which area that you're working on, what it could tell us about the larger sort of site. But yeah, it's interesting to see what more information could come out of it. We know that the other Palais Royal site is probably connected to it as well, because it's in that arc of interesting pre-colonial sites, I guess. So I'm always interested in these sorts of things in terms of building up the knowledge.
Yep, great. I'll share my screen and can you see that?
Yep, good.
Yep. It's over here for me, sorry. So again, apologies for the August date there, but so just a very small bit of backgroundy type stuff, which I guess predates all the harbours and things that were built along the foreshore. So in 1846, Newcastle was declared a free warehousing port, which allowed goods and produce to be exported directly from Newcastle without having to go through Sydney. Despite this, at the time, very little was done to improve the harbour. It was in 1855 that Edward Moriarty was appointed the engineer surveyor responsible for the Hunter River improvements, and he he changed an awful lot about the harbour. 1856, a new wharf, Queen's Wharf, was built on timber piles with copper sheathing along the line of the ballast wharf from Watt Street. And the new seawall was constructed west of Watt Street, which encompassed quite an extensive area. And I do like this plan that just shows this whole area west of Watt Street, as well as the earlier harbours and the wharf, including Moriarty's Wharf on the east of Watt Street. And the Market Street boat harbour, which predated the Perkins Street boat harbour, is, I'm not sure if my cursor's there, it was kind of at the western end of that large area that's been enclosed. So in terms of boat harbours, 1840s, they're on the east side of Watt Street. 1850s, the west side of Watt Street, that large area was enclosed. 1857, the formal sandstone line Market Street boat harbour with its fish market. 1886, the Market Street boat harbour was considered too small. And it was in 1897 that the Perkins Street boat harbour was constructed. That remained in place until 1860, when it was turned into when it was resumed and turned into a collar port, which is still there today. A couple of the nice historical images. So it's on the right of that image. This is around where the Market Street boat harbour was. The much railway station is right down on the left. Again, you can see here the fish market and the Market Street boat harbour right at the end of the coal staves. And again, the Market Street boat harbour with the fish markets and the finger wharves. And again, beautiful, that's the fish markets there, which was moved to the Perkins Street boat harbour. That building was moved. Again, a nice little image of the Market Street boat harbour. And just as a little recap, I'm sure I have previously presented on this, I think, and there is a report about it available on the Hunter Living History site. As part of the Newcastle Light Rail project, 62 metres of wall of the Market Street boat harbour. I put in a couple of images. So you can remember that that's at the top of the old, whatever you want to call it, that was there, the mushroom tower. And you can see the extent of the sandstone footing of the earlier Market Street boat harbour with its finger wharves. A couple of details showing the finger wharves coming out. Some pre-1880s graffiti, and also the really nice sandstone base, still with the old mooring rings intact and in situ. And on an earlier slide, there were some words about the base of it being pulled up to construct the Perkins Street boat harbour, but you can see there was still substantial in there. So Perkins Street boat harbour, I've just put in a few of the historical images and maps that we have. You can see the fish markets that was moved. The whole building was picked up and moved from the Market Street boat harbour. You can see the footbridge over the rail line to Hunter Street. And it's this concrete wall here next to the boat sheds. The sun was exposed. So again, you can see the fish markets. The orientation of the building has been changed, but it's the same building that they moved from the Market Street boat harbour. I'm just running through, I guess, sequentially in time, there's some of the images we have of the Perkins Street boat harbour. A lot of them courtesy of Greg and Sylvia Ray in their fantastic book. A nice aerial, again, showing, and it's this little bit of the wall here that we found, or council found. Here's some of the old like higgledy-piggledy sheds and stuff that were put there. This 1939, and an image that someone sketched of those sheds. One of the last aerial images showing their boat harbour. And this is one of the most recent images in 1949. That's just the little arch bridge going out into the main harbour. And I quite like the fact that it's still shown on the 1960s street maps. And so as part of the council works, approximately 23 metres, it was directly below the car park surface. So in red, that's the alignments that was exposed right along the edge of the former rail corridor and the current water car park. And you can see there's a little footing, or what I think is from the old overhead footbridge as well. And it was this portion with the edge of the overhead footbridge that was exposed during the works. And it was just the top of it, because again, to build a car park, they're not going down very deep. They're really just taking off the surface. So this is the southern wall. Again, just some images showing that's the full extent that was seen looking towards the harbour. Again, this is the interior of it with a rendered concrete capped, and the wall itself was concrete. The exterior was rendered as well. So this would have been facing the rail corridor. And this is the footing of the, what I believe is the old overhead footbridge. Just a couple of images of that. And then the other edge, and you can see this, the edge of it to the south has been rendered as well, where those boat sheds used to and in terms of the footing for the overhead footbridge, part of the light rail project, we found quite a large, all on its own, sandstone block footing beneath Hunter Street. And I think it may well be the opposite end of that overhead footbridge that was uncovered during the light rail project under Hunter Street. So I've just got a couple of images just of that. It was quite a large, but it was in the right location, and there was nothing to suggest it was anything else other than the southern footing for the overhead, the former overhead pedestrian crossing of the rail corridor. So again, just a couple of images of that, and where the footings for the overhead pedestrian bridge may well have been fixed into the sandstone. And that's it for me for that little presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Any questions for Tim? No, that's good. All right. Okay. Can't see anyone. Sorry. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Tim, for that update. All right. Great. Okay. So let me just get rid of the chat and onto the, okay. So got some news. The exhibition Light on Morisset inside the hospital is currently underway at its location in Scene at Swansea, which is 228 to 231 Pacific Highway, Swansea. The exhibition dates from Wednesday, the 27th of October 2021 to the 5th of December 2021 from 10 to 2. So parking is through the Wood Street car park directly behind the Swansea Centre. And there'll be a former Morisset Hospital registered nurse on duty every day to help with your tour and answer any you can't ask that questions that you may have. In addition to that, there's a book launch, The Private World on a Nameless Bay, A History of Morisset Hospital, which is in its second edition. And that'll be launched on the 19th of November 2021 at 10 a.m. at the Lake Room ground floor of the Swansea Centre. So there will be COVID restrictions and there are limited tickets, but we'll share the links with you. So, and that might be something that group interested in the history of madness would be probably very keen on knowing more about. Yeah. There's an invitation to the launch of the Wang and District's Anglican Church Records, 1838 to 1987 digital project. That'll be held on Wednesday, the 1st of December 2021 at 2 p.m. at the Wang Family History Group Incorporated. So anyone in that area, we can put the details, we can send the details out to you. They've done extensive research in special collections over the years, so they're quite excited about the launch of that book. Another book that's been lost in the COVID 2021 has been Spirit of Place, Aboriginal Sites of the Hunter Region, which has been put together by Alan Chornos, former photographer here at the university, retired a few years ago, and his partner Carol Carter in association with Uncle Warren Taggart. So the book celebrates Aboriginal cultural heritage in the Upper Hunter region with art sites from Wonnarua country and the surrounding lands. Warren Taggart, as a Wonnarua elder, who writes about his background and connection to the country. The book is absolutely beautiful. We had advanced copies of it, and they're just beautiful. The preface is by Professor John Maynard, who's recently retired from the university, but was chair of Aboriginal history. And there's also an essay by archaeologist Dr. Gillian Huntley, who those of you might recall was one of the presenters at the Past Matters workshop a number of years ago. So it's quite a beautiful book. Don't miss it if it comes out. They've been very generous, and there's a preview of the book available at the link, which we'll also share. Now, Sue Britton is with us today. She's has a call for assistance with the United Services Club across a whole range of things. And Anne, I thought, and Chip, this might be something that's very interesting to your students or work integrated learning student projects in general, because they're after quite a lot of assistance with the collection of objects. So Sue, I'll hand it over to you if you wish. I'll just run through the list of 8 things to get people thinking. So the first is on labelling. They have managed to catalogue the collection, but now need extensive assistance to label the items. They have storage issues with some of the items, so they're seeing if there's any place that they could probably store some of the more difficult to store items that they might not have the proper facilities for. Significance assessment and valuation of the collection. Grants, if there are any grants available. I know that Member for Newcastle recently sent through an email with some grants that they were offering on a Commonwealth level. There's also the National Library of Australia Community Heritage Grants that provide some funding to have professional heritage assessments done, or significance assessments. Collection and museum training for the committee. I'm sure that there might be some, we might be able to provide some help there through our team with Dr. Amir Mogadam. Identifying gaps in the collection, that's something that will probably come out of an assistant significance assessment, pardon me. The use of the art curator in terms of the art and photographs that they have in their collection, and the overall management of the collection itself. So Sue, did you want to say a few words, or?
Only that we're extremely enthusiastic, but they're the club is in quite an old building, and unfortunately the roof is the priority at this stage. So there is virtually no money, but obviously we would provide lots of coffee and that sort of thing, but we're happy to do references or be referees or whatever's necessary for people needing that sort of recognition. I did, John, leave one thing off. We have some items about a VC and we need it framed, and I'm not a local. So I also need the name of a really good framer.
Okay.
Framer. But other than that, no, I think you've covered everything.
Okay.
It's an interesting group. It's lovely to find out it exists. But,
Yeah.
You guys at 10 out of 10, we're about a minus 10 out of 10. So we do need a lot of professional assistance, just that knowing.
Yeah, well, there could be bits and pieces that we could supply here, and then Anne's got access to lecturers in Sydney that run museum studies courses down there. They're always interested in their students getting real world experience working on things. So this might be a big project, but it might be something that might do with a bit of planning in terms of, and I noticed that you had a spreadsheet with a lovely listing of all the objects in there. So that's that helps.
Yeah, and
So-
we're quite proud of ourselves. We only had a 2% loss rate when we did our stock take. So that was
Okay, good. Ron, sorry, Barbara.
Just to Sue, when Fort Scratchley had their significance assessment, Bill Storer did it for us.
right. So he's
Yeah.
actually volunteering with us at the moment.
Yes, is he?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, he's very knowledgeable, and he did a wonderful job on doing our significance assessment.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So if you go down the community grants path, the National Library can provide money for a significance assessment, but they have a list of assessors. Is Bill on that list, Ron? Do you know?
Look, I don't know, Johnny. He may well be, but
Okay.
like it's probably 8 years or so ago since he did our assessment.
Okay. Okay.
Mm.
So did someone else want to say something? I heard someone murmuring. Just unmute yourself and yell if you wish. But yeah, so there's probably opportunities. Sharon, I know, has access to some grant funding. I think she's trying to help with community groups at the moment. But the community heritage grants is a good mechanism because it gives access to a professional significance assessment that can then, in the eyes of the Commonwealth, identify whether your collection there is of national significance. And then if that occurs, then it frees up further money to work on whatever your priorities are, in terms of storage, or it might be digitization or whatever it is that is concerning you. But with something like that, you're probably going to need a number of different people sort of helping you at different times with what they can. But anyway, we'll just open up the conversation for now and see what, at least it's there, that there's a real world example of need, and we'll see where the help can come from.
That would be fabulous.
I've tried to find online the community grants. I can't find it. When I do, I'll send them to you, Sue. But the grants,
Thank you.
I have found that there's a Saluting Their Service commemorative grants. So if the collection has like content, I know a lot of it is military related, isn't it?
Yes.
That grant closes February 2022. I'll send you that as well. And for students at the university that might be doing work integrated learning, they can do like an 80-hour project. So there may be a student that's part of it's like the everyday lab model, and I'll send you the course coordinator's details if you like.
Yes, please. That would be fabulous. Yeah, really good.
Okay. Just,
can I just ask anyone recommending a photo framer? Nope.
Look, there's Aaron framed it. That's pretty good.
Okay. That'll do. Just one's enough.
Just one. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to suggest Aaron framed it as well, Johnny. He does all of our stuff.
Yeah,
There you
that was going to
go.
be my
So-
recommendation as well. I know lots of
Oh,
artists.
God.
use it.
Everyone
me
loves
too.
Aaron framed it. So there you go. I'm glad I threw him in. I'm always worried about,
Yeah.
But
That
it's the
is
same thing with
outstanding.
bookbinders, if you like them, you suggest them, but Aaron seems to be pretty good.
Yes.
Okay.
That's
I'm just
excellent. Thanks,
interested.
everybody.
That's all right. No troubles. All right. Well, just finally on my updates, I'll just share my screen with all the, can you see that?
Yeah.
These were all the posts there was about 9 posts that was spawned from the last Hunter Living Histories meeting, and almost killed us last year, but it was quite last month, which was only 2 weeks ago. But this is the first one, which was on the history of aerial photography. So this is John Fryer's notes, which he sent through to us, which we put up online, which was sparked, and there's these pigeons with these photographs, and an addenda to that is the camera which Robert Watson's contact in Melbourne which was Frederick Barry's glass negative camera. We spawned a question about the resolution of these old glass plates. So that was, John also provided some information on that. So that became blog post number 1 on the history of aerial photography. Then the missing piece of the historic 1906 Newcastle Panorama that Robert tracked down for us after 115 years, and also completed the work of the late Russell Rigby. So we created a blog post about this with the images as well. And Robert's widow was very, very delighted to hear this, one of these unfinished stories coming to a close. So there's Russell's original panorama, which he took in 2010, and there's Robert Watson restores the missing piece. So, and these are the other images which were kindly and generously sent by the former hydrologist in Melbourne who bought these images sight unseen, Leo Bren. So that's blog post number 2. And then this was the Newcastle and Suburbs aerial view from 1944. This is the one I just couldn't resist sharing. So if I get in trouble, I get in trouble. But anyway, it's quite beautiful imagery of Newcastle under camouflage in 1944, as Ron Barber identified there. So go to the site and follow the instructions on how to view it. And there was the entire Hunter Living Histories meeting on Zoom with the updates and also the details of the people and links to the various information that we provided. We also had the Kooragang Island posting due to the radio show on the difference between Ash Island and Kooragang Island. So the entire sound file from ABC 1233 radio. The other questions I wanted to know about was more about when Kooragang Island actually became a thing, when it was first mentioned. So the interesting connection between Kooragang was it was the Reverend Wilton's farm in the middle of Mosquito Island. That's what was called Kooragang. Now, as to the name, Mark Matricus told us the name according to the Geographical Names Board, but again, I'd love to see a more authoritative or where they got their name from. But Reverend Wilton was pretty interesting because he was very close to the Aboriginal people. He was the Reverend at Christchurch, and it's also through his testimony in the 1846 report on the condition of Aborigines that we finally got a date of death for Biriban. It was very important with Threlkeld at documenting the Aboriginal language of this area. So it was his actual farm where the name Kooragang came from. So there would have been some sort of significance to it. So anyway, we added the entire transcription here, not just because of it, but also because of the information with regards to the first Newcastle Mechanics Institute and all the early Newcastle identities that were mentioned in it. But there was the actual excerpt from the New South Wales Government Gazette as to the date that it was actually gazetted. So this was the date that Kooragang Island actually took over from all the other names that we had in the Hunter Estuary, Ash Island, Mosquito Island, Dempsey Island, Walsh Island, Spectacle Island, Table Island, Pig Island, you name it, they had a name for the island. And down there is also links through the Hunter Living Histories post to all the online original maps. And if you click on them, you'll get the high resolution versions and also the various islands that are named by each of those particular map makers. So they're all sort of very island focused, but there you go. So that was all part of that project. Then we had the launch of the Castanet Club story, which is the latest in the stories of our town. This is a beautiful film if you haven't seen it yet. Goes for about 30 minutes, 20 something minutes, but it'll put a smile on your face. And there's the background on it there. Look forward to the next one, which is on Fortress Newcastle, which will be launched on Remembrance Day, which is on the 11th. And this is the 1844 plan of the Hunter region, which was one of these things I had to do to fulfill the Kooragang Island post, because this is again another important important map showing a lot of the islands of the Hunter River estuary and their various names. And the final one is the bit of film which Anne and the team digitized last week, because we were looking for Owen gun footage, and luckily we had some wonderful records donated by Alan Stein between the 1990s and the early 2000s, and I knew that there were 2 videotapes in there, and we didn't know all it had on the videotapes were gun tests, and they ended up being official 1941 film of them testing out all the machine guns, and the Owen gun was just superior to the Sten, the Thompson, the German Bergmann, and yeah, so this was a wholly designed and invented Australian submachine gun, and there were 3 films that were part of this series of things that Alan had dubbed on this videotape. But this first one, which contains all the tests, and they're throwing the machine gun in mud. They threw all the machine guns in mud. They tested them up against sandstorms to emulate what it would be like trying to shoot these things in the Libyan desert during a sandstorm. And the Owen gun was just this beautiful thing that you could just take apart, put back together, and again, it just always worked. But the actual film was filmed on the 22nd of December 1941 at the Long Bay Rifle Range, which is now the Anzac Rifle Range down at Randwick, New South Wales. And the other 2 accompanying films were Australian Inventor Creates a Miracle Gun, which is silent, there's no sound with it. But the other one, the Owen gun in mass production, actually shows women at work manufacturing the Owen submachine guns at the licensed factories in Newcastle. So it's perfect footage for Glenn and the team. That's what they were looking for. And so good stuff. So that's everything that's gone up online since 2 weeks ago. So I'll stop the share. There you go. Any questions or any further news from any of the groups? So I'm just looking through the chat. That's all right.
Johnny,
yes.
I had a call from Glenn this morning about Fortress Newcastle, and there's been some suggestions that they should have a major launch of it on Remembrance Day, and one of the proposals is to have about 4 venues where people can book in and sit and watch it, and they were suggesting that we should try and use both barracks rooms at the fort and possibly do a nighttime one there.
Is that possible, Ron?
Well, one of the commissions I got from Glenn this morning was to find out whether it is. So I think it probably would be. Equipment might be a problem, but it shouldn't be a great problem though.
Yeah. Oh, well, it looks like it's going to be pretty good. They were sort of putting it in as...
It's amazing, the last copy that I saw of it.
Yeah. So anyway, it's just going to be a wonderful piece of work, and it's just been fantastic that it's, been able to be done in this year with all its upheavals, and I just think it's a miracle that they got it done. The really good thing about it is the number of octa and non-generic, whatever the term is, that they've managed to record. It's just been fantastic. I think that's been the real bonus, as well as telling the story. The Fortress Newcastle is really, really good. So look out for that. And I hope it comes through, because it's always good to view them in public. Yes, Bob. Other Bob
Just
Donald.
going to mention on that subject, there is a meeting on Thursday at Delpratt's Cottage where all the members of the project team have been invited, and this will be a review of that video done by Glenn.
Okay.
Bob Cook's already seen it, but the rest of us are going to get a chance to see and put our 2 bobs worth in. I think it's, from what I've gathered so far, it is brilliant.
You haven't seen it yet, Bob?
Yeah.
You haven't seen it in its rough form or anything like that?
Also, just a matter of interest, some of the Fortress Newcastle team are going to visit up Port Scratchley tomorrow, Wednesday, sorry, looking from the point of view of a possible venue for the exhibition, you know, confirm the details. So right now, Fortress Newcastle is forging ahead.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful piece of work. So I think everyone's going to be pretty happy with it. But I'd say there's still been last minute working on it because that footage was only digitized last Friday, wasn't it? And
it was, yeah, and it was so difficult to find, just that little bit of footage that related to the Owen gun. Rachel Bourne, who's with us at this meeting, we will be meeting her physically tomorrow, which is quite exciting. She's working on the Fortress Newcastle project. So yeah, looking forward to her being able to sort of find some treasures for your exhibition, Bob.
Okay, so there are any updates from the various groups that anyone wants to share? No. Any news that people want to share? Okay, no. Are you just putting up your hand for checking your watch, Ron? You've had, okay. Okay.
Nicole's asked a question in the chat. Why is the island like mosquito? Why is it spelled M-O-S-C-H-E-T-O?
Good question.
Yeah.
Good question. These are mysteries of the unexplained that be interesting to know. I don't know. Mosquito, don't know.
Johnny, there's references to both. The spelling of both. You know, old inhabitants of the island used to say, you know, the mosquitoes are that big, therefore they've named it Mosquito Island. But yeah,
it's interesting going through all the names. I mean, the name changes over time as well. But the ones that we've got to be careful of are some of the Aboriginal names that have come down, like Carrington is a classic example where you've got Karumba Island, which is sort of which is, I think, an authentic Aboriginal name that's recorded in Dangar's map, Dangar Cross map. And then during the 1880s, 1890s, it goes from Onamagamba, which becomes another Aboriginal name, but I think it might be a retrofitted one. So some of these, some Aboriginal names around town were sort of put in place by people who were interested in just native names. And we've got the records of Canon Carlos Stretch, who wrote under the name of Boscobel, that was part of this sort of, I guess it was kind of like a fad where people would write to Boscobel and ask for suggest a native name for their property or their place or their post office, or it might be, and Boscobel would suggest something very appropriate. And it's okay. I mean, but the problem with the one Tirakiba, which was near BHP, was that people then conflated the two names and believed that Tirakiba Post Office was a traditional name of that place. And then they always comment on how amazing it was that Aboriginal people had a place of fire just like we do. But it's really, the name was sort of retrofitted after, and I don't think it had much to do with Aboriginal people at all. So it's really important to try and isolate where the authentic names were and where the sort of later names came in, which is always a bit of a trick. That's why it's always good having original documents at your disposal that you can check things against.
It's really interesting. I think one of the better known now, because the dark and young people and the Darug people are working so hard to bring awareness to that, is Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park. Ku-ring-gai Chase is actually named for the Ku-ring-gai people of Dungog. But somebody had heard that word and liked it, so they tagged it onto this vestige of land down in Sydney, and it stuck. So people think it's a Sydney word, but it's not. It's people from up here.
Yeah, this is the sort of thing that we're always. It becomes difficult when people become attached to words and stories and things, and it's almost like you become a wet blanket when you're trying to put. But I'd rather people be armed with the knowledge of where these things come from and understand where the sources of these stories are, so we don't sort of fool ourselves. And it also helps people get things right. But yeah, there's been a lot of that going on all over the place, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that Ku-ring-gai question's interesting, and I'm going to consult my language book to see if there's a Warama or at least a Garang word.
Yeah, please do.
That is somewhat similar. It could be a Gurungang, you know, be anything like that, which is
because because from Wilton's account, Wilton. We did have a biographer who was a relation corresponding with us a few years ago. I should try. She's got an old Hunterlink address, which I suspect is finished now. But she would know if he recorded something, because in his accounts, he records not just what the Aborigines ate, but he records the names. So he obviously took the time to know a bit about them. So he wouldn't have chosen Ku-ring-gai without knowing what it meant. It's always the source of where they're getting their stuff from is what I'm always interested in. So yeah, if you can find anything, Nicole, that would be great.
Fascinating.
And also, Nicole, the gentleman, Bob Siren, I don't know if you know Bob. He's
well, I know the Sirens. I don't know Bob, but
yeah. So Bob very forensically sort of researched a lot of government records and collection museums. So we've got a blog post I've just shared in the link. But if you want me to introduce you to Bob, he's down in Adelaide, but I'm sure he'd be more than happy to sort of talk to you around any language. Share anything that he knows.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Jude?
When Ku-ring-gai Island first came into being, there was an article in the Newcastle Morning Herald, it would have been, about where the name came from, but that would be outside of Trove. So, you know, and exactly what date that was, you know, so someone would have to try and look through. Maybe it's it would be in the indexes. Maybe it would be in the Newcastle Morning Herald indexes that the library in town has. Yeah.
I actually have a whole folder on Machado Island, partly from personal research, partly from liaising with Vera over the years. So after this meeting, I'm just going to send it all to you, Johnny.
Yeah, okay.
Through it. It's PDF and Word document.
All right, thank you. Because I know from the 1871 map, you can see where the farm is, but yeah, be interesting to know.
There's mention of Reverend Wilton, so.
Oh, great. Anyway, these are the strange things that come into your mind. I've never thought about the origin of Ku-ring-gai because, as I said, Glenn Albrecht always used to joke about it being the Aboriginal place of toxic waste, you know, so, but he was referencing the sort of industrial degradation that it had undergone. But I never thought that there would be an actual connection. So Wilton's farm as the connection from where Ku-ring-gai Island, the whole of Ku-ring-gai Island got its name from, was just interesting. You learn something new every day. So any other updates before we close? We've only got 5 minutes, so speak your mind or forever hold your peace. I sound very Presbyterian there. All good?
I think it's the first time we've finished early.
I know. I think I need some brownie points. Usually.
Well, I think we're all sort of getting, I don't know, just getting tired, I think, towards the end of the year.
Okay, well, our next meeting's coming up in December.
December the 6th, yeah.
December the 6th, is it? Okay.
Yeah, the 6th. Yeah. So
We've got 8th on the agenda.
Oh, have I? Oh, no. I have to change that.
Is that
Yeah.
6th or 8th?
It's the 6th.
Yes, you're right. It's the 6th. All right, that's an error. All right. Okay, so Monday, December 6th, and we may have some presenters on that day, but otherwise it will be the last meeting of the month. So we'll be wrapping everything up for another year. So anyway, I'd just like to thank everyone for making time today to share with us, and I hope it's been of some use to people, and we'll see you next month. And thank you very much, Nancy. I don't know if I thanked you officially, but thank you very much for your presentation today.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.